This is easy. This is easy.
Hey, so moving right along here, I've created some of these cables. These are the power cables that will be getting replaced. So these, there's actually 3 of them. I made 3 of these. These are for the graphics card here, GPU. And I also made another one. Where'd it go? This is for the hard drives. So this will replace that over there. And everything's tested and working pretty well. So the way this is going to happen is, right now the system is initializing these hard drives over here. It should be done probably by the end of the day, maybe today, but otherwise it'll be in the morning. What I'm going to do at that point is I'm going to run a burn-in test on this for probably about 12 hours or so, just with the way it's set up now. Once I have that baseline, then I will connect the GPU power to the power supply with these cables, and I'll do another burn-in test just to make sure that the power is good for the GPU. Once that's done, I will then do the hard drives, do another burn-in, do the CPU, do another burn-in, do the motherboard cable, do another burn-in. That way, each step along the way, if there's any problems or I start to see any degradation in performance or whatever, then I have a way to identify which cable it is just as I incrementally go along. Again, this is kind of an experiment. I'm pretty confident these cables will work. I have no reason to suspect they won't. But nevertheless, I did reconfigure these PCIe cables for the 6-pin to 8-pin compatibility, where they just take 2 grounds and add them to the last 2 pins. So I just went ahead and did that, built these into these cables as if they are natively 8-pin cables. I think for now that's about it. These cables are a lot of work, actually. It's one of those things where, I don't know, I guess you really gotta want it. I mean, I certainly do want it. I don't like this kind of stuff, and I don't really want to deal with it. I think it's one thing for these data cables, you can kind of make those look nice, but there's also not very many of those, and obviously this is kind of a unusual situation, but I like the way it looks anyway. The only thing here that I didn't show was making these cables for the power. This is actually the reset button and the hard drive light. So this is plugged into the hard drive LED and the reset switch. It's on because it's initializing all the hard drives, so it's just going to be constantly on for now. And then this one over here is the actual power button and power LED. Made these little cables with this braided nylon stuff that plugs into the motherboard there. So what'll happen there is that once I'm done wiring all this up and verifying everything, I'm going to take the motherboard off of this. I'm going to drill a hole kind of like maybe about right here somewhere underneath the motherboard. And then I can run these power cables through the backside, and then I'm going to drill some holes. Probably I might just put them here and here. I'm not sure yet. I had an idea of putting one there and one here, but I think maybe they'll look good just here, but we'll see. It's an aesthetic thing, I guess. But then these will get mounted into the board. You know, they've got this screw, so I'll drill a hole wherever I decide to put them, and then those will flush mount onto this board. As for everything else, I think this is pretty much a complete system at this point. I am eventually going to do a liquid-cooled system. So where you see this box up here and this empty spot up here will be filled with liquid cooling stuff. Up here I'll have a radiator and a pump, and then over here I'll have a radiator and a pump. And then this radiator and pump that will be here will service this GPU, and this radiator and pump will service the CPU. So this heatsink will go away for a water block. This will go away for a water block, and we'll go from there. What's left? Well, pretty much I've gone over the things that are left. These power cables with some burn-in tests, the reset switch and the power switch mounted. Other than that, this thing's just about ready to go. Just waiting for the system to do its thing. And I got to build the other cables. These cables were pretty easy to do. Interestingly, I decided to twist these cables. Originally, I was going to have them just be the full individual wires just all over the board, but that's way too complicated. And honestly, it's a lot of work to make it look good. I could probably do it if I had some layout. I'd have to, kind of plan it. It's really difficult to kind of just make things run wild and make them look good. So I decided just to twist them up like this. I think they look pretty good anyway, just like that. Then I did the hard drive cable over there, which was, in terms of just the leads, was very easy. It's only 5 cables, but it's the most complicated cable because there's 5 different connectors on it, whereas these are just one on each end of the cable, but that one has, the ones in between. So yeah, I just got to do these 2 CPU cables and the motherboard cables. That'll be done. So I'll bring you back when we have a completed system. This is pretty much done. Well, phase 1 is done. Okay, so I've redone all the power cables, as you can see. Very happy with the results here. But man, you really have to want this. To get all this done and have it be good is a lot of work. If you do end up doing this, make sure that you have a way to test all of the connections. And what I mean by that is where these wires come in to the connector here, you're crimping these pins onto these enamel coated wires. Now the crimp actually has enough force to kind of pierce through the enamel coating into the copper. I went ahead and did some soldering of the pin to the actual wire before I inserted it into the connector. The problem though that I discovered was that some of these pins are doubled up, especially here and at the GPU. What was happening is that as I was twisting these wires and bending them, they were twisting inside the pin and breaking that solder joint. Sometimes it would come completely out. So I was having a lot of problems early on making sure that these connections were staying put and were actually making a connection. The process was to crimp each of the ends of the wire, solder them, and then test the continuity from the actual pin to the other end of the bare wire. And then once I verified that, I would put the pins into the connector, and then I would crimp and solder the other end of the wire and test the continuity again from the connector to there. And then I would put it in the connector and just do one final continuity check. This way I knew that the pins were good and that they were making contact within after I had inserted it into the connector, because that's kind of a stressful point as well. Then I would plug it into the motherboard and the power supply just loosely, just kind of looped with no bends, turn on the system, make sure that it still worked, make sure that I was still getting good voltages. Then I would turn off the system, bend the wire. After the bend, I would take the wire completely off, the motherboard and power supply, bring it over to my desk, test each wire for continuity, and then install it back in once I was sure. Each of these wires, well, each group, so there's these 2 CPU wires, there's the 3 GPU, there's the 4 hard drive, and then there's the main motherboard cable. So for the CPU, I installed those. Those are very simple cables. I installed those, booted the system, ran a stress test, made sure that everything was good, did the same thing for the GPU, then I did the same thing for the hard drives, and then I finally just did the end was the motherboard cable. And it is by far the most complicated cable. You can see it's kind of, I don't know if you can see in there, but it's messy, but you know, it is what it is. There's not really a whole lot you can do. Every time you touch these wires or you adjust them, do it with the system off, because if for whatever reason when you're adjusting these or getting them a little more how you want them, if one of those connections breaks and the system is on and booting, that's, I think, when you could really incur some damage. If you do it while the system is off and unplugged and everything, then I feel like if there is an error, it just won't boot and you're fine. And then you can make your adjustments however you want. Do all of that stuff with the system off. I don't even touch these when the system is on like this. This is the end of phase 1. Basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start using this. I'm going to mount it on the wall right here in this lovely white space, so you'll see it there. I'm going to just kind of use it for a while, make sure nothing's wrong with it. You know, I don't want to have any sort of like issues crop up before I do any further work on this. The next phase is going to be water cooling. It may be a while before I get to the liquid cooling part, because like I said, I want to use the system for a while and make sure that I'm not going to spend a bunch of money and time on something that needs more work over here. I'd rather work on this stuff while there's no cooling system in the way, and having a chance of like water or something, or the glycol or whatever, getting on the system by unplugging it and getting stuff out of the way. So anyway, I think that's going to wrap up phase 1 of this PC build. Keep an eye out for the next phase, which will be the cooling. So awesome.